I'm David Suddjian, and welcome to Bird Bomb's helpful burst of ID info. And right off the bat, I want to say I've got gullrific news. We're going to have two bird bombs on gulls this winter. Gulls are such a big topic. There's whole big books written about gull identification, and I don't want to set off a nuclear blast here on bird bombs trying to cover gulls. So we're going to have two more normal sized bird bomb explosions to explore this topic of gull identification in Colorado. Now, I know that gulls can be overwhelming and they are confusing, they're daunting. Some people find them scary, even. I hear newer birders sometimes say things like, well, I really haven't started my gulls yet. Like they're setting aside this whole group of birds because there's just too much to deal with, and what I want to say is let's just relax. And we're going to share a basic approach tonight to gull identification here in Colorado that can be applied anywhere you go. And it'll make it a little simpler so we won't get so overwhelmed. So breathe deep and take it easy. Don't be afraid. All will be well. The thing is that, like, when you're out on a field trip and maybe you come to a good gull opportunity, or even you're anticipating that, and you have this flock there before you, and there's maybe a few hundred gulls, and they're moving around some every now and then. Something comes along and disturbs them. They fly up and they settle back down, and you're working through them maybe with the leader, and it just seems like there's too much. It's hard to know what you're looking at different times, and it can be overwhelming. And this is the way it is. Gulls are confusing, and they do really look the same. A lot of them are on the same basic color plan, and when you're looking through them and you pick out one that looks a little bit different, it may very well be something that's confusing for you to figure out what it is. And then you begin to learn that there are these immature plumages that look different over different years. And it seems like all of a sudden you're rolling the dice with their gull ID. And then you hear this talk about hybrid gulls. Oh my, oh my, that's just a bit much. But the good news is that gulls are big and they generally sit still out in open places. Sometimes far away, but sometimes they're in close. But you can actually get pretty good looks at gulls. It's not the same way with warblers, right? So they're big and they're out in the open and they're kind of sitting still. And the experts will say, well, this is a good opportunity to develop your skills observing, feather wear and molt actually in the field on the birds. You can observe this stuff. You might see abnormal plumages. You can notice individual variation. You can look at these different hybrid gulls and begin to identify them. Well, that's all, great for the experts, but it becomes a little bit overwhelming to consider that. So let's bring it down and let's get Gullable in 3 easy steps. Okay, these basic points are going to get you there to what you need to know to take it deeper into gull identification. First thing we need to deal with, though, is a very important step 0. There is no such thing as a seagull. All right, don't be a birding boob and talk about seagulls, that group of seagulls over there. No, no, no. Beagle, yes, yes. There is also an eagle. That's okay. And there's even deagle and smeagol, but there's no such thing as a seagull. So let's just get past that right away, and we'll move on to step 1. And that is, you need to learn which gulls to expect and when. All right, this is a basic status and distribution point. What to expect and when is going to help settle what you might need to consider. So Colorado's had a lot of different gulls appear over the years. 21 different species of gulls have been recorded in Colorado. Here's the full list on the left. Take a look at some of those very exotic names that maybe you've never seen in Colorado. Maybe some of you have. Ross's gull, for example, little gull, kelp gull, exciting names there, but a lot of them are ones that we're more familiar with. And we can pare this down right away to only 12 species that are regular annually or are not real rare. All right, so right away, we've almost halved our list just by considering what to expect according to kind of how frequent they are. So here's our 12 core Colorado species that I'm proposing for bird bombs. Some are rare, some are common, but we're leaving behind the truly rare ones. And we can take it even further. We can consider what time of year are we at when we're looking at gulls. If we're in the late spring and summertime, the nesting season, basically, Colorado has just 3 species of gulls that are commonly present at that time. So it's the Franklin's gull, ring-billed gull, and California gull are our breeding season gulls here in Colorado. You might see a herring gull or a lesser blackback gull somewhere in that mix, but that's kind of rare. All right, so these are the three. All three have nested in Colorado, two of them regularly, the Franklins and the California. And so that makes it a lot easier in the summer. It is more complex when we get into the fall and winter time at this time of year. But again, there's only a small number of species that are commonly present. And really it's six. It's six different species that are the most frequently encountered in Colorado during the fall and winter time. Bonaparte's gull I have listed there is a little more locally distributed in the winter, but it is commonly present during this season. So again, considering the season, we've pared down our list quite a bit, and we know what we need to be ready for. So step two, remember step one was learn the status and distribution. Step two is become very familiar with the most common reference species. All right, so a reference species is a species that you see a lot of, and usually in good numbers, so you can become very used to what it looks like, its different plumages, how it behaves, what all it is about. So a red-tailed hawk was a good example of a reference species, and here in Colorado, I proposed two species as reference species, a smaller one, the ring-billed gull, and then a larger one, the herring gull. And these work really well as reference species for us here in Colorado because over 95% of the gulls here now are ring-billed and herring gull. In fact, the vast majority of them are ring-billed gulls. I don't have actual data on this, but I'm going to apply what I think is pretty much an accurate guesstimate. And right now in the state of Colorado, there's probably on the scale of maybe 200,000 ring-billed gulls. And in Colorado right now, there's maybe on the scale of 400 or 500 herring gulls. And everything else is a lot less than that. California gull would be the next one down on the scale. But you can see it goes from this big 200,000 down to my guesstimate of 500. So big order of magnitude change there between the ring-billed and the herring gull, a couple orders of magnitude. But these are our two reference species that we want to become familiar with. And on the bottom right, I've listed some sorts of things you can consider as you're looking at individuals of these species. And you can actually make a study of it. You know, when you go to a place and you see gulls, maybe you are hoping to see something a little more exciting than ring-billed gulls, but if you're presented with a good opportunity to observe them, then take advantage of noting the different variations among the individuals, getting used to how they look, and so on. So that'll really help you as you go along. That's the whole idea of the reference species. So let's take a little quick look at the ring-billed gull. We're going to look again a little further. We'll be presenting ring-billed gulls all along here because this is the one that is far and away our most common gull in Colorado. And we're familiar with it, right? It's a smaller gull. It's kind of dainty in its look compared to other bigger gulls. It has a pale gray upper parts, and it has a yellow bill with a black ring and also yellow legs and a yellow eye on the adult. So a lot of these pictures are adults. We see on the left-hand side, the one that's nibbling on something gross is a wintertime adult. You see that speckling on the head, that tells us it's wintertime. That's a feature they have. If we see them in the breeding plumage, as they are in their alternate plumage, then we're going to see their head is nice and clean. I don't have any of those individuals here on the screen because we're looking at them right now in the wintertime. So we have some adults across here. And then we have a couple that show a different bill pattern and some brown on the wings. Those are our first cycle birds. These are birds that are in their first year of life. And they look a little different. All right, so we'll come back to that. So that's our small reference gull. And then before we leave this one behind, I want to share a special video here. This is a ring-billed gullnado out at Aurora Reservoir not too long ago. And thank you, my friend Cynthia, for the term gullnado. It's very great description for what we see out there. So when you see gulls doing this, they're up in some nice air that's allowing them to thermal around. This particular flock had just been disturbed off the beach and they just swarmed overhead. It was magical to watch them. So let's consider our large reference gull for just a bit. This is the herring gull, right? So it's a good bit bigger than the ring bill. If you look at the picture in the lower left area, you'll see a ringbill really small next to a rather hefty herring gull. And notice the difference in the heft of the body. The herring gull is a much stouter, bigger bird. And look at its bill. The bill is much thicker than the ring-billed gull's bill, giving it a different appearance there. And its eye is even paler than the ring-billed's eye, so kind of a white yellow on the herring gull. And we have some immature herring gulls, and you'll notice that they are all brown. So we'll come back to that. All right, so step 3 in our 3 easy steps to getting gullable is to learn to recognize the age of individual gulls. So we talked about how young gulls are brown, and as the gulls get older towards their adult plumage, they take on different appearances. And so we want to be able to sort out what we're looking at. And to help us with that, we can decide, what age gull we're looking at. And that's going to steer us in the right decision track for identification sometimes. So the reality is that most of the gulls that we see are adults or in their first year of life. There's a reason for this. So the gulls are busy nesting and they make lots of babies. And those babies fledge, and all of a sudden there's a lot of juvenile gulls in the population, like late summer. And during the course of their first year, from that late summer going through the winter and spring and all, a lot of those first year birds are going to die. So there's high mortality, but there's a lot of them to start with. And as they go into their second and third and maybe fourth years, the mortality rates decline as the birds survive longer. But so they decrease, and then as an adult, the mortality rate is relatively low, and the adults are long-lived, maybe 20 years or more is not uncommon for gulls. So we have a lot of gulls right in that very first year, and then a lot of gulls once they reach adulthood, and we don't see too many of the ones in between. Okay, so here's a little chart we're used to maybe hearing about, oh, that's a 2-year gull or a 4-year gull. And what that's reflecting is how many years it takes to reach ordinarily an adult type appearance. And it kind of goes by size. The smaller species, Bonaparte's gull, for example, only takes 2 years to reach an adult appearance. Mid-sized species, the ring-billed gull, one of our reference species, is a 3-year gull. And then we have the bigger species, and they take 4 or in some cases 5 years to reach a full adult appearance. And so our herring gull is in there with the 4-year gulls. And so the story is that gulls change appearance over their first years of life. They go from all brown to clean white and gray. And there's predictable steps in between that we can be ready for to help us with those in-between birds. So let's look at this, traversing here from the early part of life on the left-hand part of the screen to the adult plumage. And we can see in the upper left there's an all-brown ring-billed gull. Now, actually, here in Colorado, we don't see too many all-brown ring-billed gulls like this. This picture was taken in Montana, I think it is. And this is a bird that has just fledged and is still begging there from one of its parents. Notice the posture, probably making little begging squeals, little noises. And the bird below it is a bird that's just a little bit older, and it's already getting pale on its head in July. So what happens is these are examples of first cycle birds, and notice that these very young ones are a little bit different from the ones I've labeled first cycle in the second column there on the left, but they're all the same age. And what happens is that gulls are molting pretty much continually, and it helps us to use this word cycle rather than year to say first year or whatever, because that can get a little confusing in its connection to calendar years at times. And so the cycle is basically, you can think of it as going from more or less September to September once you add in the first couple months of the bird after it fledges from the nest. But we can think of it as September to September, keyed into the pre-basic molt. Now, gulls are molting almost continually from the time they leave the nest all through their adult life. They right away begin a pre-alternate molt and then go into a protracted pre-alternate molt and a long pre-basic molt. So throughout all the months of the year, they're pretty much molting somewhere on their body. So there's a lot of change going on. And you can observe that during the course of the winters, birds will actually change their appearance as they progress through a molt. Okay, so that's what that cycle's all about. So let's go back to our first cycle story here with the ring-billed gull coming out all brown, and right away it's molting after leaving the breeding grounds, and it acquires a gray mantle or back area here. See the gray on the upper parts here? And notice it's the very same gray we see over on the adult. All right, so that develops right away. And when we see ring-billed gulls arriving here in Colorado in late summer, after nesting young ones, they are pretty much looking like this bird on the top image. Already, though, with that gray back, but notice it's got little flecks of brown. This bird is maybe a little further along in that molt, and it has less flecks of brown than the other. And so what happens with the first cycle bird is begins all brown, and notice that these feathers are actually not black, even though the pictures might look that way depending on which image, but they're actually a dark brown. The adult birds are the ones with the really black flight feathers sticking out here. These primaries is what I'm referring to. Okay, so we've got the gray back there, but otherwise still a lot of brown on that first cycle bird. Moving to the right, second cycle. Now the bird looks a lot like an adult ring-billed gull, doesn't it? But it's missing a few things, or some things aren't right. So the second cycle bird looks like an adult, but the bare parts are dull. Notice they're not bright yellow, and they may have markings on the bill that aren't quite right. There's no white out there in the primaries, just maybe a little bits of flecks here, but not big white spots. And the eye is dark, so it hasn't acquired the eye color of the adult ring-billed gull yet. And then the adult with a clean white body and gray upper parts. Bare parts are bright, and there's white out in the primaries. Now remember, the dark mottling here on the head is a non-breeding season feature, but the body is clean white. Right? No more brown on the body like on the second cycle bird or those first cycle birds. So young gulls, the gray is the same on the adult. That's really helpful in helping to identify them at times, because their gray color can be important in our choices. And the bare part color changes with age, but the way the bird looks, how it behaves generally, those are the same as no matter what age it is. Okay, so now we can take that to the herring gull. We'll stick with the same first cycle, second cycle. Now we've included a third cycle because the herring gull is bigger and takes an extra year to reach that adult plumage. So it begins on the left all brown, just like the ring-billed gull did. Unlike the ring-billed gull, the herring gull does not go right away into beginning to molt, usually until it gets to somewhere it's dispersed to after nesting. And so it doesn't come to us gray-backed, and it won't become gray-backed until we see it again almost through its first year of life. So our herring gulls stay all brown, and their bills are generally dark. Their flight feathers are brown, not black. Sometimes the bill becomes lighter, and it does become lighter as the bird goes through that first cycle. So there are some changes that are going on, as I've said. Notice the second cycle bird has a gray back now. And it's that same pale gray as we see on the adult bird. The bird on the bottom part of this row of pictures of second cycle is in March. And so it's already molted farther and become even paler than the bird earlier in the season, like the one up on the top. So that's an example of what we see changing. But what we see in common is that these birds have a gray mantle like the adult color. In the case of the herring gull here now, it's adopted the adult's eye color, and the wings are still brown. The tail still has some dark in it, and the head and body have become paler. All right, so you just can't see it paling out. And then again, the third cycle looks like an adult, but the bare parts are duller than the adult. They don't have as much white in the primaries, and there's often some dark on the wings or the tail. See, this middle one is showing some dark right here. That's out on the wing still from that are helping us to realize it's not really in its adult state, right? Because look at the one to the right of that, it's all white there. So you can compare, and then also compare the bill color and pattern, the brightness of the bare parts. And you can see that's a third cycle herring gull. Looks a lot like an adult, but not quite ship-shape. The adults have the clean white body and gray upper parts. The bare parts are bright, and there's white in the primaries. Notice the bird on the lower right. That's one in alternate plumage taken in June, and it is has none of those wintertime brown fleckings. It's all neat and tidy and looking quite dapper. So let's review. Here's our 3 easy steps to get gullible. Know what to expect, learn the reference species, and start to sort through what age is the bird. Remember, most of the ones we see are first cycle and adult. Right. So when you're out at the lake, you want to work things to your advantage to the degree that you can. And so if you can obtain better lighting, by all means, work around to whatever angle is going to give you the best opportunities to view the birds from lighting that's, from behind you or at least obliquely to the side. So that's going to really help a lot. And you want to get closer, get closer, get closer. This is one of the most important things. If there's any way to navigate around to get close to the birds, you're really going to enjoy the views a lot better. Sometimes you can't, or you can't do a whole lot, but when you can, go for it. And connected to that, you want to use a scope. Sad news is that in many situations here in Colorado, it's really hard to enjoy gull identification just with binoculars because you can't often can't get close enough to really see the details you want to see. So connect with somebody that has a scope. If you don't have one, go out on a DFO field trip, whatever it is, but that's really helpful. Consider the situation at your location. And sometimes birds are present at certain times of the day, or there may be certain viewing conditions that are better at certain times of the day. If you go up on the lakeshore access in the morning, it's backlit, but in the afternoon, you've got good lighting. So think about that and find the places where the gulls are. And in the wintertime here in Colorado, that means where there's open water. Now, right now, at present, there's a lot of open water, but soon there'll be a lot of frozen water. But there will be places with open areas remaining or holes in the ice. And that's places where you want to find your gulls during the wintertime, especially to find some variety. So consider your habitat and realize that when you're looking at gulls that are just too far away, it really, you can enjoy the aesthetics of the moment maybe, but it's not worth the effort to try to sort through the ID. Maybe you're looking for something really rare and you're going to stick with it, but I tell you, put your time in other situations. So remember from our reference lesson there that most gulls are ring-billed gulls. Sometimes they're all ring-billed gulls. It can be kind of frustrating, but most of them are, and that can work for your advantage in a way. So it gives you the opportunity to scan for something different. So you processed your reference species ringbill ID, and you're looking across the big flock, like maybe this one on the marina here at Lake Pueblo. And I can tell you, I guarantee you, and I know from experience that nearly all of those gulls there are ring-billed gulls. Now that happens to be a really good gull location, and odds are there are some other species in that large group there, but I know that most of them are ring-billed gulls. And I'm going to look through with the scope if I can, and I'm going to look for something different. So I'm going to look for something that's maybe bigger, stands out taller. I'm going to look for a different shade of gray among all the very pale ring-billed grays. I'm going to look for a bird that's all brown. Okay, ring-billed gulls aren't all brown, right? So that's going to right away take me to one of the other species. I might do that. I'm going to look for, as I'm scanning, some birds will have their eyes or bills or legs visible. I'm going to be looking for something that doesn't match my ring-bill paradigm, maybe a different head pattern. So you kind of scan along and look through a lot of gulls to pick out things that are different. As you're watching, you want to realize that the lighting has a lot of effects on things. So one of the things that's important for gulls can be the color of their upper parts. And bright sunlight tends to wash out grays, and cloudy skies or snow on the ground tends to darken grays. So you kind of keep that in mind as you're assessing. And when you're looking at birds and comparing one to another, you want to find ones that are oriented about the same toward the light, because they're going to have a different tone of gray. If one's oriented this way and the other is 40 degrees off, the gray colors are going to be different on the two birds, even though they're really the same. So you can be mindful of that, and we'll see some examples on some images later on. When we get into the late spring and summertime, basically the nesting season, young gulls sometimes will have very worn plumage, many of them. They may look rather whitish. Brown, blacks will be faded to brown, or dark browns will be faded to pale brown. things will be looking not quite right. So when you see an odd looking gull that looks really kind of worn out during the early summer, you're looking at evidence of a lot of feather wear going on. All right, so it's time for the gull reality check. And this is that you won't be able to identify some gulls even with good views. In fact, you might not be able to identify a lot of gulls even with good views. Here's a great quote from Howland Dunn in their Gulls of the Americas, and helps us to understand. So they say that gulls are an equalizing force in identification. They can readily humble each and every one of us by defying specific identification. The proportion of unidentifiable gulls never approaches zero, right? So that should actually be kind of sobering information there, and also encouraging, because even people who have a lot of experience and knowledge with Gull ID regularly find gulls that are challenging to identify. And if they're honest, they will find ones that they don't apply a label to because we're just not sure. Gulls are complicated, and we just leave some of them behind. If you're watching carefully as we're scanning through flocks on this slide, you might have noticed the snowy egret there on the lower right. I have a little blue arrow pointing at it, or maybe not. It's fun what you can pick out sometimes as you look through a flock. And one of the things I love in looking through flocks is that you can go through once, and you go through again, and you see different things. It's fun to kind of discover new treasures. All right, so let's take a little moment here to consider a little bit about the places on the bird that we put names on. We're just going to take a little bit of time. Here's a classic ring-billed gull adult showing us that gray upper parts and clean white body. We've got some wintertime flecking on the head. And what do you call those upper parts? Well, we can put some names on different parts of the area there for different feather tracks. It's okay just to say upper parts. On an adult bird, they're all the same, right? Or even on a younger bird, you can say it's got gray upper parts, and we know what you're talking about. You can be a little more specific on areas, and when you get to some of the more challenging gull IDs and things, it is helpful sometimes to consider some of the specific areas. But in general, you can just talk about gray back or gray upper parts, and we're kind of good to go there. But you can kind of see the names of those parts. And notice that these black things sticking out the tail end of the bird are not its tail or its rear quarters, but those are the primaries. So gulls have long wings, and they have long primaries, and they stick out a long way on the closed wing. Here's a bird, immature bird. We can kind of compare. Here's one flying, and we can kind of draw some lines and see where those feather tracks end up when the wing gets closed. And here's remember, when the wing is open, the primaries are the farthest thing out, and then secondaries, and then the tertials way in on the inside. And as the wing closes, the primaries go underneath the secondaries, and the secondaries go underneath the tertials. You can imagine that if this wing is closing here on the upper right, primaries go underneath these secondaries, and they go underneath the tertials. And all you're looking at on the closed wing, if you look down on the bottom right, are the tertial tips. And in the case of the gulls, their primaries are long, so they stick out. So some of the primaries remain visible, or at least parts of them. All right, so here's just a detail on the upper wing. We won't worry too much about this, but it's good to have the names for these things. We see that adult gulls have white primary tips, and they have these white areas further in on some of the, usually just the outer two primaries, or maybe the only outer one, sometimes some others in some rare species, but those are called mirrors. So you have tips and mirrors. And then on the gull's bill and eye, a few things there I just want to call out. We'll only focus on one area here, is this gull, this word that we really only encounter in Gull ID, gonies, is this part of the bill right here. And on a lot of gulls, it kind of gets broader in what's called the gonidial angle, or the gonidial expansion. And often there is a color there, a red dot on gulls. It's called the gonidial spot. And that's the place where baby gulls peck to get the adult to regurgitate food when they're still in the nest. So we have a gonies, and part of that, as it expands out, is the gonidial angle or gonidial expansion. Take a look at this herring gull on the right and ringbill on the left, and just compare those bill sizes, different bill shapes there, the different tone in the eye, a little more whiter on the right, sometimes hard to compare in a photo maybe. So here we have all the Colorado gulls listed again. And it's quite an array. 9 of these species I've highlighted in pink. These are ones that are vagrants or rare here in Colorado that you're not likely to see, or they may be ones that are hard to identify. But these are kind of the rarer group. So I'm kind of singling these out of the rest of our discussion for tonight. And remember, we have 12 species that occur annually, and that you can reasonably find reasonably easily. And these are our core gulls. And gulls are good candidates for first state records, we should be aware. Two that are especially likely maybe to turn up, according to predictions, which are usually wrong, are the Heermann's gull and the black-tailed gull. You can check it out in this former Bird Bomb's first state record from last December. So gulls are kind of exciting that way. Notice in this listing of gulls on the left, the smaller species are the ones that are the 9 species above that yellow line. And these are gulls that are in various genera. Take a look at those scientific names there. I love the Sabin's gull name Zima. Isn't that awesome? Great genus. And I think it is the only gull in Zima. So that's pretty cool. But these are smaller gulls. Many of them have dark hoods in their breeding plumage or alternate plumage. And then below the yellow line, we have 12 larger species, all in the same genus Larus. And these are what we could call white-headed gulls. And this group has a lot of complicated taxonomic relationships, especially among the bigger species, the lower portion of that group. And they also include a number of species that hybridize regularly. Western and glaucous wing gulls out in the Pacific Northwest are notorious for that, abundantly hybridizing. But here in Colorado, the hybrid gulls are not so easy to find. They're not unusual. And when you learn what to look for and you go to the places where the large gulls congregate, you can find them. And they usually involve a herring gull and one of the other. Herring and glaucous wing is our most common hybrid here in Colorado. So here's our 12 core gulls. And we'll leave all the others behind. And we put up our 4-letter codes here just for the sake of it here, just to note that 2 of them are not standard. Short-billed gull has to avoid overlap with 2 other species. So it's S big, and the herring gull is Herg. All right, so we can note that. And we can take a look here at this beautiful gallery of gulls that I've arrayed on the right side of the screen. So these are mostly adults. There is actually 2 juveniles here. The bottom center is a juvenile bird, and the top center is also a juvenile bird. And in the case for both those species, most of the ones we see in Colorado are juveniles. But anyway, what I want you to focus on is just kind of take them in. Notice the bill shapes and sizes, how they vary, generally becoming bigger as we get toward the bottom. And just the look of the bird, how the effect of a dark eye changes the impression that you have of how the bird looks versus a very pale eye. Some of these gulls look kind of mean. Some might look kind of gentle, right? These are useful kinds of things to get used to. Notice how the gulls on the top have these small bills that are adapted for picking at the surface, and the gulls down in the bottom area have gulls that are more adapted for ripping things apart, much more stout and more formidable. All right, so here is the species names there for those. Hopefully you figured them out, and maybe think, how many of those have I seen in Colorado? See which ones you're missing. You might want to go looking for this winter. All right, so we can take notice that some of these species in our core gull group are rarer than some of the other ones. So we're left with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 species that are less rare here among the core gull group, and some of them that you kind of have to go out of your way to find and enjoy, such as short-billed gull, which is turning up right now in Colorado. You can track down eBird reports or go look at a lot of ring-billed gull flocks and find one. So let's consider some of the patterns of these different species. We're kind of back on our S&D theme here, the status and distribution. And when we learn what to expect when, then it helps us to be ready and to sort out what we're looking at. So these are some small species that pass through the state. They principally, or really almost only, occur in Colorado in a migratory sense. So we have the Bonaparte's gull, black-legged kittiwake and Sabin's gull here. And the Bonapartes is our most common of these small gulls. We often see them in flocks, and they're kind of local in the wintertime. I have some numbers up on the right. They're showing us what the average number that we might encounter in a good time of year for that species, and maybe a high count if we were really fortunate, what sort of scale we might be looking at. You can see the Bonapartes is the only one of these that has both a spring and a fall presence here in Colorado. Notice the different seasonality of those peaks. The Sabin's gull is regular only in early fall, and they're quite predictable in September and October. You can find them almost sure thing if you go to the right places, but that's the only time they happen. And if you want to find them, that's when you're going to look. And black-legged kittiwake is a fairly rare gull here in Colorado, and it's a late fall occurrence and into winter a little bit. So here's three species that have a summer presence: Franklin's, ring-billed, and California. The other species really don't, except for kind of unusual individuals. These guys have a summer presence. The ring-billed gull, one of our reference species, is abundant during the non-breeding season. Colorado's most abundant gull, found wherever gulls are present. With the rarest of exceptions, there's always going to be ring-bill if there's any gulls. And during the summertime, there's many fewer, but it's still quite regular, and non-breeders gather where gulls like to gather. And you may see a few hundred ring-billed gulls even in the summertime, but they're all going to be birds that are non-breeding individuals, and they're going to be mostly in not in adult plumage, so younger individuals. Now, the Franklin's gull is breeds very locally in Colorado, is present around a little bit in the middle of summer, but it's mostly present during migration times. And I'm sorry, let's go to California gull. I got ahead of me there looking at the graph. So California gull is also most numerous in migration and in the nesting season. It does have some colonies in a few counties: Park County, Jackson County, Routt County are three counties in Colorado where the California gulls nest, and they can be quite numerous at those places. And then they're more uncommon in the winter, except they have some favorite places where you can find them pretty regularly. But usually only find a small number of California gulls during the winter. So Franklin's gull is really mostly present during migration time, one area where they nest in the county, but mostly they're absent outside of the warmer time of the year is kind of what it comes down to. So notice that little thing I've highlighted on the graph as a February dip. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. It's kind of an anomaly. Why is there a dip right there in late winter? What's going on? You know, the ring-billed gull, you can see it has a big peak here in late fall of migrants moving through and arriving here in Colorado, but then the numbers drop off. This is actually frequency, percent of checklists that the bird has been reported, but the frequency here tracks very closely to numbers. So I'll just say the ring-billed numbers peak and fall, drop, but remain very high in the winter. And then there's a significant dip and then an increase again. So let's hold on to that for a minute, because it's kind of a cool thing I wasn't aware of until I looked at these graphs. And right away now, we're going to consider some northern nesting species. And look at those charts. There's that February dip again for three species that we're showing here, just like the one we saw on the ring-billed gull. Let's talk about these birds a little bit first. We have the herring gull, or other reference species, and we know that it's fairly common during this time of the year, but it's rare during the spring and summer. Usually, if any large gulls are present, meaning bigger than ring-billed or California, then it's going to be a herring gull there in the mix. So that's kind of a good reference point there that herring gull provides for us. They're usually present to compare to the other big gulls. The lesser black-backed gull is also pretty regular to find. It's not as numerous usually as a herring gull. I'm incorrect on my slide here. It's not the third most frequent gull in the winter here. We've got to insert the California gull in there, but maybe fourth most frequent is the lesser black-backed gull. And you can see several individuals at good gull places during this time of year, but they become rare during the spring and summer. And the last one here on this upper part of the chart here is the Iceland gull. And this is a gull that comes to us in two different subspecies. Only one of them is regular and relatively easy to find here in Colorado, and that's the Thayer's form. In your field guides, they may still say Thayer's gull as a separate species. It was lumped into the Iceland gull just a handful of years ago now, and so the Thayer's gull, you'll see in eBird, it'll say Iceland parentheses Thayer's. That's the one that we mostly have here in Colorado. There's a paler one, the Kumline's gull, which has white wing tips as an adult, and it is rare here in Colorado. It does occur, but for the rest of our consideration here, when I say Iceland, we're talking about Thayer's gull, right? And they're uncommon. They're around. Everybody wants to find one. People see a lot more of them probably than are really there, but they are there, and it's one of the more nuanced identifications that we have, I think. All right, so especially when you're still getting used to them or you don't get a chance to see them very often. So here's our other northern nesting species. We have the great black-backed gull, which is rare in Colorado in the winter, but it is predictable. One individual has been coming back to Pueblo, Lake Pueblo for many, many winters. Quite elderly now as far as gulls go, I think, but that's exciting to see that one again and again. In fact, he's imaged here on the right-hand part of the slide. And we find the great black-backed gull at places where gulls like to gather in some varieties, so the prime gathering spots. The glaucous gull is a little more common. You can probably find one each winter if you go to good gull places, and especially later part of winter can be a good time for them. And then the short-billed gull, this is not a big one, but one of the little ones, even a little smaller than the ring-billed gull, is rare in the fall and winter, but you can find them, and there's been some around lately here in the metro area. And again, you find them wherever gulls like to gather in good numbers. And usually they're right there among the ring-billed gulls, and you have to pick them out among the ring-bills. So I'm going to backtrack because I didn't solve the February dip. No, I'm not. So that February dip, you know what I think it was? I think our wintering birds, some of them migrate on to somewhere else when they get to late winter and we have a numbers decrease. And then other birds arrive as they're moving north, and that creates that increase again in early spring. So kind of a cool detail to pick out off the graph there. So we'll take a little more detailed look at our ring-billed reference species. And we have some adults imaged here and some young birds. We've got a basic adult on the left and a first cycle ringbill on the left. And we can remember the ringbill adult is pale gray. It has a pale eye and a yellow legs, a yellow bill with that nice ring on the bill. So a distinctive look to it. Remember, on the smaller side. And so we can look down below and we see this is a pretty young first cycle bird, but it does have pale gray coming in here as it's begun to molt in some different feathers up in here. All right, but we can appreciate that pale gray back. There's a dark eye, these kind of flesh pink legs that aren't yellow or really not the same color at all as the adult. And it has a dark tip on a flesh color bill. So again, the bill pattern doesn't match the adult. So with the ring-billed gull, it's a smaller size gull. It's smaller than most of the other gulls that you see. And this time of year, with the exception of a rare one like the short-billed gull, it really is the smallest gull around that you see usually sitting out in gull gatherings. And it has that medium long, kind of narrow bill. There's no red there on the bill, and the bird has kind of a slim build. Your main comparison species for a ring-billed are going to be short-billed in California. Those are the ones that are sort of closest to the ring-billed gull. Here's a first cycle flock in the bottom center, and this is in May. And notice they're not as brown anymore as, say, the bird on the left-hand side that's labeled first cycle. So they've already progressed further in a molt, and they're actually going to begin their first pre-basic molt pretty soon. But they're now looking a lot whiter there on this ring-billed gull. But you can still see brown on the wings, telltale mark of a first cycle bird. Love that flying basic adult. I can appreciate his mirror or her mirror and how clean that body is underneath. The tail is all white. Adult gulls have all white tails, these white-headed gulls. There's no dark there anymore. Here's a little gathering like we see all the time. several adult ring-billed gulls. We know that it's wintertime because of the mottling on the head. And we see one young one there, a first cycle bird standing partially obscured. And it's given away his first cycle by that big brown panel across the wing, even though we can't see a lot of the other detail. Notice the wingtips aren't black, they're brown. And it doesn't have those nice white spots as the adult does. Here's a nice comparison of our two reference species, the herring gull in the back. And I was saying earlier how the color of the mantle can appear different if the birds are not oriented the same way toward the sun. Here's a good example. The herring gull is one way. The ring-billed gull in the front is pointed a little differently, and the gray appears darker on the ring-billed gull, even though they have the same color gray. So if you're considering gray tone and looking at your birds, you want to remember that. Here's a first cycle bird in the middle in late May, and it has now become kind of worn. Notice this area here that was brown feathering is now kind of worn to whitish. And this used to be rather dark brown, but now it's a pale brown here on the tertials. So that's what happens when the bird get late in the season. Their feathers have been exposed to the elements for a long time and they wear out. So those feathers won't get replaced again yet for another couple months on this bird. So in the back, you can see some California gulls. You can compare, they're a little bit bigger. The mantle, the upper parts are darker gray. Again, notice the two Californias aren't oriented the same way, and one appears a little darker than the other, but they're both a lot darker looking than that ring-billed gull, our reference species. The colors on the bills are a little different. You can see the California gull, if you squint really hard on this left-hand one, you can see there's even some red there, but we'll probably have a better example of that as we go along. So let's take a look at our herring gull now. So the herring gull is again, very pale as an adult. We have the adult on the upper left and the first cycle bird on the lower left. The adult is very pale gray, has a very pale eye, nice pink legs, and a red spot, that red gonidial spot, and some variable black near the tip of the bill. So you might see herring gulls in the winter that have just red, pretty much just red on the gonidial area there, or they often will show a little bit of black coming in a varying pattern from one individual to the next. So don't be thrown off by that. The first cycle bird, I'm sorry, I'm going to go back here, is all brown and has that nice dark eye, and its legs are pink like on the adult, and its bill is generally dark. As the bird goes through the season, the bill will become pale at the base. And an important reality of gulls is they don't all progress through things at the same rate. And at a given time of the year, you may see a herring gull that's become a little bit paler because of molt, and the bill has become a little paler at the base compared to another one standing next to it that looks a little bit different. But the pattern of what's going on remains the same. So herring gull is a larger gull, stout yellow bill, not a whole lot of a gonidial angle. We'll worry about that when we compare to some other bigger ones in the next bird bombs. Good build and kind of a mean look on the adult. Notice the dark eye erases the mean look on the young bird and kind of gives it a dumb look, I think, is what the dark eye could impart, or maybe a little more gentle. There's a lot of species, bigger gull species, that are similar to the herring gull, which is why this is such a good reference species for us. So here on the upper right there, I've got a herring gull kind of looming over these smaller gulls in the foreground. There happens to be two species of gulls in the foreground, but the herring gull often stands big among our other gulls. And the one on the right, the two of them are ring-billed gulls, and those four gulls are right on the left were Californias. I'll just go back and have a little look there. We won't worry too much about that on that picture. So now we have a second cycle herring and a first cycle ringbill. And notice the pattern on this second cycle herring is similar to the bird that's 1 year younger, this ring-billed gull. And that's because the birds molt in a little bit different pattern. So the herring gull retains that brown plumage without getting a gray back all through its first year. Whereas the ring-billed gull in first year already gets that gray back. It takes the herring gull to get to its second cycle to get a gray back there. You can kind of compare the size. Notice the bills aren't too different looking in their patterns. but they're very different in their size and sort of shape and heft. Here's a third cycle herring gull now, 1 year later, again with some first cycle ringbills. And it looks a lot more like an adult herring gull, but notice not big white spots out on the primaries, and the bill has a lot of extra black and really not a lot of red showing, and isn't as, it's not quite as bright as the adults would be. All right, so now we've gone through some of our basics. Remember, learn the status and distribution, learn the reference species, become familiar with aging gulls, and we've looked in some detail at our 2 reference species. So let's consider now, kind of mix it up a little bit, because gulls often do mix together if we're lucky. And here we have a neat image of 3 adults in basic plumage. Remember, the head markings and the dull bare part colorings help us to recognize the season. And these are 3 different species. This is not a Colorado picture. We'd be really lucky to see them arrayed like this here in Colorado. This is from California. But these are 3 gulls that occur in Colorado. So one of the things we can notice right away, hopefully, if we look at our bill patterns, we see that all of them have a little bit of a ring pattern going on, but one of them looks familiar to us with a yellow bill and that nice ring pattern, plus the yellow, bright yellow legs and kind of a good yellow eye. And that is, of course, our ring-billed gull, upper right. So as we compare, we want to look at the sizes, the gray tones, the bill shape and color and pattern, and the leg color. All right, so the other 2 species are actually a little bit darker in tone than that ring-billed, aren't they? It's not a big difference in this particular view, but they are darker. One is smaller than the ring-billed, one looks a little bit bigger than the ring-billed. One has, both the other 2 have dark eyes compared to the ring-bill's light eyes. One has a really small bill, a little bit shorter in length. We can put it together. Short-billed gull and California gull are our other 2 with the ring bills. So here's a view in July of a few gulls, and this is a couple different species. And here in the front, we see all brown, and this is a ring-billed gull. Notice how the bill is kind of our what we're getting used to is kind of dainty relative to some of these other bigger gulls. And we know that it's July, so this is a brand new bird, pretty much brand new out of the nest. So it still is all brown. By the time it goes through another month or so, it's going to get gray here. But we can kind of compare to these other ones behind it and see they're looking a little bit bigger. And these are California gulls in the back, and a fresh juvenile ring-billed gull there in the front. The California's gulls has a larger bill, and we can recognize a little darker pattern than we'd expect, because what's that left-hand gull? That is a ring-billed gull, right? See, notice it's paler gray compared to the darker gray with the Californias, and it's actually a little bit smaller. Doesn't have white here, so we know this is probably not an adult. This is July, and the ring-billed gulls we have here in Colorado in July are not adults. They're off toward the nesting grounds, so you'd be dealing with a second-year bird there. All right, so here's a neat little mix. Kind of look at it. First glance, you might say, oh, there's 2 kinds of gulls, because one kind of stands out being bigger and darker. They're sort of in the middle. And then maybe the rest are the same, but no, there's actually 4 species of gulls here, right? So we can pick out our reference species. What are we looking for? That pale gray mantle, smaller size. Here's a row of ringbills across the middle foreground. And then in the center here, we've got one that's quite a bit bigger with a rather dark upper parts. And I'm not getting into the ID features too much tonight, but that's a lesser black-backed gull, right? One of our regular core gulls. In the back, we have some that are a little bit bigger than the ringbills, with a somewhat darker mantle, but not as big as this lesser blackback and not as dark as that. These are California gulls back there. What else can we find? In the front, there's somebody different. He's quite different. That's a Franklin's gull with the black legs and the black on the head, and smaller yet than the ringbill. Right, so that's a neat little comparison. You're kind of using your basics of the ringbill appearance to help compare and contrast with the other species there, sort them out. All right, so here's a group of gulls. And these are a little more challenging, I think, because they're looking towards us. So we can't even see the whole bird very well. Again, if we look closely, we're going to see that some of them look different, go from one gull to the next, and they all have, a lot of them have changing appearances. And so can you pick out our reference species here, looking for smaller ones among these different size birds? They're a little hard to see tucked in the back. Here's a couple of ring-billed gulls here. So if that's our ring-bill reference, we see we have a bigger one right in front. Again, a big bright bill and rather dark upper parts. That's our lesser blackback again. To the left here, kind of looking big, maybe from its posture here preening, but these are Californias, not as dark in the mantle color, upper parts color, and they're actually not as big. And notice the lesser blackback has a clean head, but these Californias are different. So right away, if we're comparing species, we would say there's some differences there. And then we have a number of Franklin's gulls. So neat little mix, playing our technique for browsing through. Here's a little scope view, and right away something stands out as different from our sea of ringbills there, something much bigger and much darker. And indeed, this is Murray, the great blackback gull. A few years ago, the picture was taken at Lake Pueblo. So sometimes the differences are startling, and you're good to go when you see that. So, all right, so now we're going to take a moment here and we're going to let it fly. So we've learned some things, and I'm going to give you a chance to give it a try and just let it fly. So we have several different images to look at, and we'll take a moment with them and see if you can kind of figure out which species you have. So let's look at number one. We've got two birds there. Uh-oh, we have one that's not a gull, but we need to identify that as well because we're good birders. But let's start with the gull since we're on that theme. We can't see I mean, it's not cooperating real well by scratching its head and can't see what's going on. The head's turned over, but right away we can see some features that'll help us. So I'll let you take a look for a moment there. And you've probably decided because of the kind of delicate build and the yellow legs with that pale gray upper parts that that is indeed a ring-billed gull. And and of course in the back is an itchy mallard. So these guys are this is taken in September, and both these individual birds are probably actively molting feathers. We know that mallard is because it's coming out of eclipse plumage, and so there's a lot of scratching going on sometimes. When you go to a place where gulls hang out, you see a lot of feathers strewing around. A lot of gulls are always molting, as I've said. So if you want to collect feathers for your pillow, that's a good place to look for them. So let's try number two. So number two here, we can't see either bird very well. It looks like it's winter time maybe because there's some snow we can see on the left-hand light, little light shield there, and it's kind of gray out. What do you think? Well, you know, I'm probably not going to be too mean to you, and so it's probably safe to think these might be ringbills, but you know, there's actually a habitat clue here. Notice where they are. They're on top of a light standard in a parking lot, no doubt. That is what happens. Ringbill gulls are our parking lot gull here in Colorado. So someone will tell me there's an exception, but I haven't yet seen it, but probably there is. But generally, if you see gulls in a parking lot up on light posts, or you know, it's the Walmart thing or whatever, it's the ringbill gull. That's the one that's hanging out in that setting. Other places, it could be different species. I know in California, I had different gulls that would hang out on top of the lights in the Walmart parking lot. But here in Colorado, it's the ring-billed gull. So take a look at number three. We've got a couple birds soaring over. Take a look at the one we can see reasonably well. Isn't that a handsome bird? And I want to consider a couple things. If you can figure out what it is and then maybe how old it is, get close to that anyway. Let's look a little bit closer. You can see, what do you see there? What might be some clues for the ID? Remember, we can look at the can't see the upper parts here, but we can assess the build of the bird. We can see some details on the bill. And we see there yellow and black and kind of a slight build. So again, it seems to be a ring-billed gull again. Do you think it's a first-year bird, which would have a fair amount of brown on the body still? Or do you think it might be a second-year bird that would be pretty much like an adult with a clean body? Or is this an adult with a clean body that would have white out on the wingtip? So I kind of talked you through so you can, actually, I think it's a first cycle bird. I think I labeled this slide wrong. And that's because there's still a fair amount of brown on the body. And I didn't really consider that. And we can see also the brown here on the secondaries. There's a little bit of white here on the primaries, but not very much at all. This little baby mirror would be hidden when the wing is closed, and we see these little baby white tips, but still brown there and a little bit of brown on the tail. So I'm going to cross that out when I finish up, and it's going to become first cycle ring-billed gull, not a maybe late in the season, not a oops, not a second cycle. All right, so number 4, we've got 4 gulls arrayed. We'll just go with our size thing. We know we see one is smaller. Bing, bing, bing. We know our reference small gull is the ring-billed gull, so we bump it up in size. We're going to take it to the next things that are a size up. These guys have darker mantles, and they have some red on the bill, but also some black and dark eyes. And we put it all together. These are going to become California gulls. If you don't know, we'll learn more about that. And one California wannabe there on the right. All right, so here we have on the picture number 1, we've got some gulls out on the water. Maybe we're looking through a scope, maybe they're not so close. We've got some that all kind of look the same, one looks different. I think you're going to conclude we've got some ring-billed gulls, several ring-billed gulls, probably even including that one in the back based on the size and the color, even though we can't see it as well, its head as well. And then we got one bigger one, an all brown. And yep, this is going to be our first cycle herring with some ring-billed gulls. So let's consider number 2. We can kind of apply some of the same logic we were putting in before. So we've got a little gull, we've got a small gull, we've got a gull that's quite a bit larger. So right away, we're going to wonder about if that small gull looks like a good candidate for our reference ring bill. It can even see a little ring on a yellow bill. Can't see the eye real well on this lighting or angle. Can see a little better on the bird that's standing behind since it turned its head. And even discern in this poor view that kind of pale eye, I think, surrounded by a little bit of dark feathering. It has a dark on the bill, kind of like a ring-billed gull might, but this bird's a lot bigger, so we know it's not a ring-billed gull. It's one of the bigger ones, and it's quite a bit bigger. So we're going to consider maybe a third cycle herring gull with that extra black on the bill, but looking a lot like an adult herring gull otherwise with an adult ring bill. So here's another gull flock out on the water, and some are flying in, a little bit of movement going on. They're bobbing a bit there on the water. What do you think? They all look the same? Got to look closely. Remember, scan through, look for something that stands out as different. And you might notice that there is a darker bird there. You see that? See what looks to be a bigger head and a bigger bill and some very dark upper part coloration there. And now it's become a little more visible, and we can conclude this is indeed an adult Leicester blackback gull with some ring-billed gulls. So scanning carefully through the paradigm can help your eyes to pick out something that's a little different. So here's a neat flock, again, down at Lake Pueblo. And you kind of get that sense of the sea of gulls that you can get in their good gathering places. And what do you think here? Take a look. So as you scan through, do you see one that looks a little different? I wonder if there might be 2 that are different, but there's at least one that's clearly different, and that is this one right here in the middle. And notice it's a little darker above. And if you look carefully, you can even see there's some other differences about it. We'll zoom in a bit. And if you go to this next bird back, you can see its bill and compare that bill to this bird's bill. Compare that bird's eye tone from what you can see to this bird's eye tone, plus that mantle colored, upper parts color difference. And hey, yeah, we've got lucky. We have an adult short-billed gull here among the ring-billed gull throng. So apply that scanning technique. Here's our last one. I don't know. What do you think? It turns out that there is a bird called a seagull, and it either looks a lot like a herring gull or it looks a lot like a ring-billed gull, but with some kind of funky details. So, but you know what? We can't go with Jonathan Livingston Seagull because it's an eponymous name, so we have to jettison that. So I'm going to propose literary gull to make up for that. So you can now, I do permit you to go out and say when you see that flock, hey, there's some literary gulls over there. I don't know. Don't go for that. But you know what? I want to say thank you to all the photographers who helped by providing permission to use their images for this bird bombs. I cannot do it without your work. Thank you, thank you, thank you. If you want to become a Bird Bombs photo contributor, I can access your photos very easily if they're on eBird. You can email me and let me know that you'd like to help in that way. So thanks again to the many photographers whose images were used for this presentation.